Hello and welcome to this video. In this one, I want to show you how you can use paper maps to conduct a survey for all kinds of purposes. And before we start, I want to explain why you can't use certain other maps that you might have thought about using. So if you are conducting a survey of field names, for example, or mass path or holy wells or something else relating to heritage, but not just heritage, also if you're trying to, let's say, create a map of flood-prone areas from your local knowledge with your local Tidy Towns group or your local historical society or something like that, of course you're going to use maps for that. And you might be tempted to use printouts of Google Maps because you think, well, it's online, it must be free and free to use and no problems with copyright or anything. Or you might be tempted to use Ordnance Survey or an Ireland Táilte Éireann maps for the same reasons. And you would be wrong because these are licensed maps and any data that you gather with these you cannot publish as open data afterwards. And there has been an EU directive since 2019, which I have on the screen here, which is there to promote the use of open data and to reuse information so we don't have to conduct the same survey over and over again and waste resources such as money and time and people's nerves and all kinds of other resources like petrol. And by publishing this data as open data sets, this should be prevented. And I'm just going to read out a bit of this website. So the key point, what you can find here, it says, the directive is based on the general principle that public and publicly funded data should be reusable for commercial and non-commercial purposes. And under open data it says, the directive promotes the use of open data, data presented in open formats, that individuals can use freely and share for any purpose. Public sector bodies and public undertakings must make their documents available in any pre-existing format or language and, where appropriate, by electronic means in formats that are open, machine-readable, accessible, findable, and reusable, complete with their metadata. And we have, as OpenStreetMap Ireland, and me personally, we have had to struggle in the past with trying to get this kind of open data to use on OpenStreetMap because it is very open, machine-readable, accessible, findable, and reusable on OpenStreetMap, because these are the principles of OpenStreetMap that we provide open data in all these characteristics. And we have struggled a lot trying to find the data that we would like to put on OpenStreetMap and also to get the data from institutions. And even when they offer us the data, we can't use it because they used these licensed maps to gather the data. And usually the open data license that is used to provide this open data is the CC BY4 share alike, which means you provide the data under this license for anyone to use free of charge, and they have to share it under the same license. So that means that all the data that has been put into this dataset has to have been from the same or an even less strict license. So if you have derived your data from Google Maps, you cannot publish it under the share-alike license because Google Maps data is not provided under a share-alike license. Same with Táilte Éireann maps. If you use Táilte Éireann maps for your surveys, you cannot publish it, strictly speaking, under this share-alike license because their data is not under the share-alike license. And it is even more difficult to get this data into OpenStreetMap because OpenStreetMap uses the Open Database license, which is even more open than the CC BY4. So this all sounds very technical and legal and all and boring probably, but it is very important that you understand this. And if you are planning a survey, that you are informed about this so you don't end up with the data set that you can't make open afterwards and kind of contradict European law by that. So that's the directive, and I will put a link to this website in the video description, of course. So there are two alternatives that you can use to produce paper maps for your survey. One of them is Fieldpapers, which I have talked about previously, and I won't go too much into it now. The slight problem with Fieldpapers is that it has a bit of a patchy maintenance history because it is run by volunteers, which often is the case with these open data and open source platforms. They have to be run by volunteers because there's no funding. But I would still recommend Fieldpapers above anything else. And you will understand why once we get into the alternative. I'm not trying to slag the alternative. It's just not made for the same purposes as Fieldpapers. It's not quite as convenient to use as Fieldpapers is. This alternative I want to talk to you about is called the SketchMapTool, and it was developed by the University of Heidelberg in Germany. And it does use OpenStreetMap data, of course. And it also uses satellite imagery from Esri, which you are probably familiar with if you've ever used the historic environment viewer. It's one of their background data layers. They call it by a different name, but it is provided by Esri nonetheless. And what the SketchMap tool lets you do is you can create a paper map in step 1 here and print it out, and then you can draw polygons on it, and only polygons, and that's the big caveat here. And if you want to work with polygons, like as I said earlier, if you want to mark flood-prone areas on a map, that's completely fine because you can do that in polygons. If you want to use them for field names, you can't really, because if you draw the field boundaries on it, you can scan those, but it won't recognize the names. Same with mass paths, because it's a line, it wouldn't work with that. But you can use it for stuff like flood-prone areas. I can't think of any other use that comes to mind that has anything to do with heritage or the environment, which are my biggest concerns. But you can use the paper map and work with that. So because you can't really do much with the second step that they developed, and which is great for certain users but not for the users I'm talking about, we would just ignore the second step and just focus on the first step. So as I said, you create a paper map with this, and there are 3 steps: define your area of interest, a map quality check, and a PDF export of the sketch map. And the map quality check isn't super important, but I'll still talk you through it anyways. So let's create a map. Let's say we will do one for marking the flood-prone areas in Thomastown in County Kilkenny, because it gets flooded a lot, and I would like to map that. It has nothing to do with heritage. Well, it kind of destroys the heritage, of course, the flooding. And it has an influence on how people get to certain heritage sites, of course, if they can't go through Thomastown. But I'll just talk you through how you can do that. All right, so the first step is define your area of interest. So we just click on create a sketch map. And this opens the OpenStreetMap, as you can see here, proper attribution, of course. This opens the map of Heidelberg, which is a lovely city in Germany, which I would recommend visiting if you have the time. But of course, we are not interested in that. We want to go to Thomastown. And what you can do is you can either, holding the left key on your mouse, you can move the map around until you reach Thomastown, which will take, at this zoom level, take an awful long time. You can, of course, just zoom out. And then move in either with the plus or with the scroll thing on your mouse if you have it. Or you could just type in Thomastown, Kilkenny, and click on the search here, and it gives you a couple of options, but they're all the Thomastown I'm looking for. If you're looking for a new town or a place name that is very common like that, you might have to search a bit longer or just zoom in on it. So there's Thomastown. So this is what it looks like on OpenStreetMap. It is fairly well mapped. And I would presume that the flood area is around the river Nore. I think it's mostly Low Street and the Quay. So we'll zoom in on that. If you're not happy with the OpenStreetMap background, you can also use the satellite background just by clicking on the thing in the top right corner. But I'd rather have a map. What would be nice sometimes if you could just rotate the map a little bit to make the best of the area that is highlighted on the A4 sheet. About the A4 sheet, you don't have to use A4. On the right hand side, you can choose your paper format. You can choose between A4, A3, A2 and A1, letter and tabloid. For me, I think A4 is good enough, but if you're working with a community project, maybe you want to print it out on A1 so people can write stuff in it. But for me, A4 is okay. And then you also have the option between landscape and portrait. But portrait doesn't really work for me here. Usually, I think landscape is the better option. If you wanted to have a higher zoom level, you would have to print out several pieces of paper, which is a bit awkward. In the SketchMap tool, it's easier in Fieldpapers where you can just choose several pages and make an atlas. And that's one of the reasons why I would always choose Fieldpapers over the SketchMap tool. But I'm just going to show you here. And you see the red hashed line. This is the area that you're going to draw in. I might just zoom in a little bit because I have been burnt before, just to be a bit more generous with the area. We will waste all this up here because it's all uphill. But since the Kilfane stream or river comes down here, there might be flooding in this area as well, and that's the access to the hospital, which is also important to know. And down here is the bridge, and I presume the bridge doesn't get flooded. So this is the area of interest, is only within the hashed line. That's very important to know, that you don't choose the whole A4 paper, it's just the hashed line. And once you have chosen your area, you click on Next. And this is when it starts the analysis on the left-hand side, the map quality check report. And on the right-hand side, it creates the PDF for the paper that you can print out. And the map quality check report is finished now, so we'll just click on Download PDF, open it in a new tab to show you. So it gives you a quality report, and the first one is a green light. It says, this region seems to be well suited for mapping using the SketchMap tool. And then there are some other indicators, mapping, saturation, major road length, that's all done. The currentness of the data is good. Well, I've just been in Thomastown, I think last week, and mapped a bit more. Should be good enough. You see here in 2012, wasn't very good, but it's been in the green area since, it's very hard to tell, 2021 roughly. It all depends a bit on what you're planning to map. If you just want to map flood prone areas, you want to have all the highways mapped, of course, but it also always helps to have buildings mapped to relate, so okay, this house usually gets flooded, number such and such, or this kind of a pub usually gets flooded or is affected by the flood, so you can have that, can relate it to certain buildings or other landmarks. Currentness in amenities is all good. It all looks fairly good, I get green lights all around. So I can close that again, and in the meantime it has created the SketchMap template, and I can click on Download PDF, which will start the download. It will end up in my Downloads folder, but it will also open it in your browser. Now this might differ if you're using a different browser. I don't know, I'm using Mozilla Firefox. And that opens it here, and it has already downloaded it because it's a fairly, in the internet speed that I'm experiencing, a fairly small file. But this is also one of the good things, that when you download the map, you have it on paper and you can go out into the field, so to speak. You only need internet for the first part, for these to create the map. So here's the map of that part of Thomastown. I presume that Low Street is going to be affected, the quay, and up to here somewhere. And then Chapel Lane is very steep up here. Would not recommend cycling up or down it, it's not fun. And then the top is where the church is, naturally, and then it goes down a bit again. But this area is hopefully, I'm not sure, high up enough already. I can print this out. I could print this out now if I had a printer. I don't, so I'll have to go to the library tomorrow and print it out there, and then talk to someone from Thomastown, and hopefully they will be able to mark the flood-prone areas for me on this map. If you go through the SketchMapTool, they have a help section where they explain all what I've just told you already, and probably much better. But they also explain a bit what pens to use, because do not use a pencil because it will be shiny, and when you scan this in later on, you won't see much. So use like a Sharpie or something. I'm not promoting Sharpies, but something like that, a felt tip, dark felt tip pen to mark in the area. On the other hand, if you want to use the SketchMap tool to record field names or mass paths, I would not go with the OpenStreetMap background layer, because you have nothing to relate anything to, because this is what it's going to look like when it's printed out, and you have no field boundaries, no tree lines, and few tractor tracks, which you might need and which are sometimes useful to orient yourself by. But on the other hand, if you go into the satellite view, you can see the field boundaries, hedges, tree lines, ditches, and so on, and that is much more useful. So as a general rule of thumb, I would say if you're mapping something in an urban area and it is well mapped, use OpenStreetMap. If you're mapping something more rural and you don't have all the fields already mapped and the hedges and so on, then use the satellite background layer. So if I've chosen this area now, this is Innisfree. I'll just open this just to see, and you already see that it only gets a yellow light, so there's not enough landmarks on the map to work with it. And that's why I'm saying it would be better to use satellite imagery, because when you're trying to map something and you can't relate it to anything, it is very difficult. See, and that's even worse. The amenities, well, we don't really need amenities to map field names, but it's not as good as Thomastown, as you can see. But you could also see that, well, I had moved the map away from the village of Innisfree into the countryside, and the countryside is usually not as well mapped as towns, and you don't need as much there. I'm sure most of the buildings are mapped, because we did this in 2020 and I went over them again this year. So most of the buildings should be on the map, and highways, of course. Features per area. Again, in a rural location, there's not a lot of features in the area. So as I said, you're better off with the satellite view, and if I open this, this is what that would look like. And remember, you probably will use a black and white printer, well, a black printer. If it's white, it just won't print. So just bear that in mind as well, that you won't have the nice colors. You know, the fields will probably look fairly similar, these ones that are plowed and the ones that are maybe meadows, I don't know. Just bear that in mind, that it will come out in black and white. And also very important, when you print this out and give it to your group of researchers or data collectors or whatever you want to call them, tell them not to do anything through the QR code. It's very important for the scan later on. If you're, as I said, if you're using this for Fieldpapers, we won't scan it in. But if you're using it for stuff that will use polygons that can be scanned, don't destroy the QR code, because it's used to locate that part of the map on an actual map. It's for georeferencing, and that would make it much easier to use in a mapping application later on. Again, if you're doing anything that isn't polygons and has writing in it, then you don't have to worry about it. But if you are doing polygons, make sure you don't destroy the QR code or damage it. You can use this for collecting field names and for recording mass path and such like, but there's no point in scanning it in, because the results will not help you at all. So in the end, you will just end up working with just the paper maps and transfer them into whatever mapping system you use. If it is OpenStreetMap, fine. And if you're using ArcGIS or something else, you can use it there as well. But of course, because the background is OpenStreetMap, it's easiest to use on OpenStreetMap, because you can relate it to what's already mapped there. When you're using it for recording field names or mass path and you're writing stuff in it, just make sure you write legible and you're not using a felt tip pen that has too thick a tip, because then it might not be easy to read certain things. And when you're recording mass path and you're recording styles, which will occur frequently along mass path or footbridges, just come up with a certain symbol to mark that on the map and make sure, the felt tip pen is not too thick and you can still read it. So I will print this out and then, as I said, I'll let someone else draw the area in it and then we'll continue from there. There it is. My friends Sarah and especially Dylan drew this for me, and of course I had chosen the wrong part of Thomastown. That's why I had to draw over the line of where I should have drawn. But I printed another one and I got more covered, and I have their verbal description as well, which is not good when I'm trying to explain how to do it on paper, but this is just what's going to happen. Murphy's Law, of course. And if you don't have a scanner, you can just take a photograph, not the one that I took there. That's not good because it has all the greases in it. But I would suggest that you maybe tape it to a wall. It's actually a tip I learned from Sarah. And you take a picture with it hanging on the wall. You can straighten it up a little bit better. And we can upload that then to the SketchMapTool. The use there for our purposes is very limited. So if you just want to work with the paper version and transfer that onto OpenStreetMap, you don't even have to worry about the scanning. You just put the paper next to you, open the ID editor and work from there. But we'll have a look first what it looks like when you scan it in. And I have prepared one where I have put some writing in, not important writing now, just to show you that it probably won't work with the scanning. And also I added a blob in pencil just to also show you that that doesn't work. So we're back to the SketchMapTool website. And you see in the second step, you scan or photograph your marked sketch maps, which we've already done. Then we upload and then we can download the collected markings as geodata. So we click on digitize your sketch maps and then you can click in this field. The usual thing you do when you upload things to the web, you have this field where you can click on and it opens your file explorer, or you can just drag and drop it into this field, which is what I am going to do. So I have this here. I called it Thomastown flood prone areas and I'll just drag that here. I've cropped it a little bit because it doesn't really need the wall around it, and increased the brightness a little bit. And then I click on upload. So we're way below the max total size of 500 MB. And then it creates a raster file, which is an image file with geolocations, which I'm not quite sure how to use, to be honest. I tried to get it into JOSM, the editor, and it didn't work for me. I'm told it should work, but it didn't work for me. So I'm not gonna put that onto you. But the second one is the georeferenced markings as geojson. And it says there it can take 2 to 10 minutes. Hopefully it won't. There we go. I'll download this and it's in my downloads folder. So I can open that. So there it is in my downloads folder, and you can see that it has been associated with JOSM because it has this symbol here, and this pencil here says JOSM on it. You probably can't see that on a very small screen. But if I double click this now, it should open this file in JOSM. All my tutorials are based on the ID editor though, because I think it's easier to work with for beginners. I'm just going to show you the results in JOSM to see whether it has recognized the polygons and the writing and so on. And then I will actually show you how to use it, the paper version, in the ID editor. So just double click and it will take a while to load JOSM because it always takes a little while. Obviously you have to have JOSM installed on your computer. If you don't want to watch this part, you can skip to the next chapter where it's about the paper map. So this is how it has converted our scribblings into GeoJSON format. You can, even without the map background, you can maybe remember that this was the part on the GAA pitch, or near the GAA pitch. They often get flooded because they're built in areas that aren't suitable for building, housing there or anything else. And then we have this larger area here. and the pencil area did actually come out. I think the last time I tried, I might have used Flash, and that just reflected too much and it didn't recognize any of that. I'll load some aerial imagery for the background so you can relate it, or actually no, I'll load OpenStreetMap Carto in the background so you can re-relate it to the map that you saw earlier. So here is the GAA grounds are down here, and it probably does extend all the way there, but because I only gave them this part of the map, we couldn't draw on that. And it does actually, remember, this is the second version of the map I printed out. In the first version, it actually extended down here. And this part here was the pencil one, which we don't need. So we could delete it. And then this was where I wrote Nor. So it has one recognized, I presume it was the E in Nor. Yeah, so, but that's no good for field names. You know, if you wrote field names into the paper map, if you get one letter, that's no use. Stick with the paper maps. I don't know why it has created 2 polygons here. But it does actually extend over into this car park, the flood does. So this is what you could use in JOSM, and then you could just highlight this, and I think you should probably add a new layer, but I don't want to explain how to do it in JOSM. So we'll just leave this here and go to the paper map. Close JOSM, exit now, and instead open OpenStreetMap, Thomastown, and I have my paper map in front of me, both of them. Save to be safe, and in the AD editor I go into the editing mode, and by default it usually opens the last aerial, well, it opens the last imagery you had open. I do think that it is easier to transfer the data from the paper map, if it is OpenStreetMap, onto OpenStreetMap background layer, which is here. So it's much easier to relate what you see on your paper map to what you see on your screen. If you're doing this from paper maps that were based on aerial imagery, choose the same aerial imagery if you can. Esri, as I said, they use Esri, so it'll be either be the Esri world imagery or the Esri world imagery clarity, very likely. So let's first add the first area here. I suppose we should snap it to the river, because the flood comes from the river. And just try to copy the area as best you can from your paper map. I don't want to be too generous here. If there's anyone in Thomastown watching who has the local knowledge and knows that the whole GAA pitch floods, please extend the flood area. So this is now just a blank area. I can close this. A blank area which we have to add the flood prone tag to, and unfortunately there's no preset for it. I will show you on the wiki. So we're allowed to use it on nodes, ways, and areas. I have used it on highways where I just highlighted the highway to say this highway is flood prone. But in this case, we're going to use the area. So we click on the left-hand side, we choose area, and just type in flood prone. Yes. And that's all. I mean, you can add source, local knowledge, in brackets, resident. Sometimes I add resident in brackets when I've talked to a resident of that area, so it's not my own local knowledge, just to make that clear. And then the other bit is here. So we'll start here. It's on the first map. It starts just below these houses here. So maybe I'll go on the side that isn't along the river, on the far side of the road, so to speak. The car park is affected, but there are actually signs in the car park saying that it is flood prone. Roughly here. I don't want to snap it to any buildings or anything like that. And then we have Logan Street. It's so weird for me to map on the Carto style. I'm so used to having aerial imagery in the background. And she said that people's gardens here flood as well. And the library car park. I think there's signs there as well warning people of that. And she did confirm that this part did not flood because the bridge is too high. Now I might have to ask her again if these buildings here on the riverside of the quay do flood, because that would make a lot of sense, and then I might have to go back and adjust this. There is a wall here which is mapped, but it could flood in here through this lane, for example. I'm gonna snap it to the river here because that makes sense. And then area, flood prone, yes. We could additionally add the flood prone tag to some of the highways, like for example, say Low Street here. This little bit. And upload. Added flood prone areas. SketchMapTool as a hashtag, and maybe also flood. Oops. And sources. Survey local knowledge. And upload. This will not be rendered, but it is important information to have recorded on the map. If you're interested in helping people affected by flooding at the moment, the HOT Tasking Manager by OpenStreetMap seems to always have areas in the world that are flooded at the moment, and you can help these projects by mapping. It depends on what they're looking for. Often it's highways and sometimes it's buildings. So we have one here, the first one. There's a flood. And then the Congo River flood response. There's one in Brazil, isn't there, at the moment? We're trying to find that now. Anyway, there's always catastrophes happening in the world, and mapping on OpenStreetMap does help Doctors Without Borders and other help organizations and charities to get the help where it's needed. So don't forget about other countries. It's not just about flood mapping in Ireland. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, helpful, inspiring, or all of the above. And I shall see you again in another one. Slán go fóill.